My name is Rachel Monroe, and I never expected that a single repair bill would change the way an entire lakeside community saw me. But when the Cedar Hollow Lake Homeowners Association refused to pay a $63,500 invoice for critical repairs I had completed on their shared lake access system, I found myself facing a decision that would test my patience, my business, and ultimately, my relationships with my neighbors. I had purchased the small marina and utility company that served Cedar Hollow Lake 3 years. Earlier, it was a modest operation when I took over, a private dock system, a shared water pump station, and the underground electrical lines that powered the boathouses along the shore. The HOA had contracted with my company for years before I bought it, and the agreement was simple. I maintained the infrastructure, they paid for major repairs, and everyone enjoyed a beautiful, functioning lake community. That spring, a series of storms tore through the region. Trees fell across the access road, the pump station flooded, and 2 of the 4 community docks were badly damaged. As the owner of the utility company, it was my responsibility to assess the damage and coordinate repairs. I brought in a structural engineer, a licensed electrician, and a marine contractor. Together, we determined the full scope of what needed to be done. New pilings, rewired electrical conduits, a replaced pump system, and reinforced retaining walls along the eroded shoreline. I submitted a detailed bid to the HOA board, $63,500, itemized down to the last bolt and cable. I included 3 competing quotes from other contractors, all of which came in higher. I thought I was being more than fair. I had absorbed some of my own labor costs and used my established relationships with suppliers to bring the price down as much as possible. The board's response was not what I expected. During the meeting, the treasurer, a man named Gerald Whitfield, stood up and announced that the HOA would not be paying the bill. He claimed the damage estimates were inflated and that the association's Adjuringers Reserve Fund would not stretch that far this year. Several board members nodded along, murmuring their agreement. I sat there in the community room, my folder of invoices and quotes in my lap, feeling my face grow warm with frustration. We built this marina fund for exactly this kind of situation, I said, trying to stay calm. The reserve study from last year showed you have more than enough to cover this repair. Gerald shook his head. We'll revisit it next quarter. For now, the association isn't authorizing this payment. I left that meeting with a strange mixture of disbelief and clarity. I understood, in that moment, that the HOA board had grown comfortable assuming I would simply keep the lights on and the water running regardless of whether they paid me. For 3 years, I had extended grace on late payments, absorbed minor cost overruns, and treated every homeowner with the same warmth I'd want for my own family. It had never occurred to them that the system depended on my willingness to keep investing in it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my business partner and longtime friend Denise, going over the contract line by line. Denise had been a paralegal for 15 years before she came on board to help me run operations, and she had insisted from the very beginning that we structure our service agreements properly. Rachel, she said, tapping the paper in front of her, this contract is clear. The lake access system, the electrical service to the boathouses, the water pump, the gate, access for the private dock area, all of that runs through infrastructure that your company owns and maintains. The HOA pays a service fee for access. If they don't pay for essential repairs within the agreed timeline, you're within your rights to suspend the service connection until the account is settled. I hadn't fully considered what that meant in practical terms. The lake houses along Cedar Hollow didn't just rely on my company for occasional dock repairs. The water pump I maintained fed the irrigation and water features for the entire community. And the electrical conduits I managed powered the boathouse lifts, the dock lighting, and the security gate that controlled access to the private lake frontage. It was all built into one integrated system when the original developer set up the community, decades ago, and my company had simply inherited the responsibility of running it. I don't want to punish anyone, I told Denise. I just want them to honor the agreement we already have. This isn't about punishment, she said gently. It's about them understanding that the system has real costs, and that you can't be expected to keep absorbing them forever. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is show them, clearly and respectfully, where the boundary is. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the retirees who loved sitting on their docks in the evening, the young families who had just moved in with dreams of teaching their kids to fish, and the fact that none of them had actually voted against paying me. It was the board, specifically Gerald and two others, who had made that call without polling the wider community. The next morning, I sent a formal notice to the HOA board, copied to every property owner on record, as required by our original service agreement. The notice explained, in plain and respectful language, that because the outstanding invoice for essential repairs had not been paid or acknowledged within the contractually required window, our company would be temporarily pausing non-essential service extensions, specifically the electronic gate access to the private dock area and the automated boathouse lift controls, until the account was brought current. I made sure to specify that basic water service to homes and emergency access would remain fully operational. This was never about anyone's safety or daily life. It was about the shared amenities that the HOA itself was responsible for funding. By 9 that morning, my phone would not stop ringing. The first call was from a homeowner named Priscilla Yates, whose family had lived on the lake for 2 generations. She was worried, not angry, and I appreciated that she called me directly instead of assuming the worst. "Rachel, what's going on? My husband couldn't get the boathouse door to lift this morning." I explained everything calmly, the invoice, the board's refusal, the contract terms, and my hope that this would prompt a real conversation rather than more delay. Priscilla listened, and to my surprise, she wasn't upset with me. "I had no idea the board turned down a repair bill that large," she said. "Nobody told the rest of us. We just heard dues might go up a little next year." That was the moment I realized how disconnected the board's ominous decisions had become from the actual homeowners. Priscilla asked if she could share what I'd told her with a few of her neighbors, and I said of course, transparency was exactly what I wanted. By early afternoon, a small group of homeowners had organized an informal meeting on the community dock, the one section still fully operational. I decided to attend, bringing my folder of invoices, engineering reports, and the 3 competing bids. I wanted them to see everything, not just my side of the story stripped of context. Gerald was there too, along with 2 other board members, Marcia Coelho and Tom Delgado. The tension in the air was obvious, but I made a point of staying composed. This wasn't a fight I wanted to win by embarrassing anyone. I wanted a resolution that let the community trust the system again. "I want to be clear about something," I said, standing at the edge of the dock with about 30 residents gathered around. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone here. I love this lake. I love this community. But I run a business, and that business can't function if essential repairs go unpaid indefinitely." The reserve study from last year specifically earmarked funds for dock and infrastructure repair. "I'm asking the board to use the money that already exists for exactly this purpose." Marcia spoke up first. "Gerald told us the estimate was inflated. Is that true?" I handed out copies of the 3 competing bids I had collected, along with my own itemized invoice. The numbers spoke for themselves. My bid was actually the lowest of the 4, not the highest. A murmur went through the crowd. Tom Delgado, to his credit, looked over the paperwork carefully and then looked up at Gerald. "This isn't what you told us at the meeting." Gerald's face reddened. "I was trying to be cautious with the reserve fund. We've had unexpected expenses this year." "Then let's see the actual reserve fund numbers," Priscilla said, openly. Today, it turned out that the reserve fund had over $110,000 sitting in it, more than enough to cover the repair bill twice over. Gerald had been quietly worried about a separate, unrelated expense, a proposed clubhouse, renovation he personally wanted to prioritize, and had used the repair bill dispute as a way to delay spending from the reserve account without bringing the real issue to the community's dollars. Attention. I want to be fair to Gerald here, because in the weeks that followed, I came to understand he wasn't a villain, just a man who had made an ill-considered decision, under pressure, and then dug in out of pride rather than malice. When confronted directly by his own neighbors, with real numbers in front of him, he didn't storm off or make excuses. He sat down on the edge of the dock, rubbed his temples, and admitted he had handled it poorly. "I should have brought this to the full community instead of making the call myself," he said. "I'm sorry, Rachel. You didn't deserve to be put in this position." That apology, delivered honestly in front of the people who trusted him, meant more to me than any check ever could have. But the check mattered too, And within 2 days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, this time open to all residents, and voted unanimously to release full payment for the repair bill from the reserve fund. I restored the gate access and boathouse lift controls that same afternoon, well ahead of the invoice being formally processed, because I trusted that the community had course-corrected and I wanted to show good faith in return. What happened next surprised me even more than the dispute itself. Priscilla, Marcia, and several other homeowners proposed forming a new lake infrastructure committee, separate from the general board, made up of residents who would review any repair invoice over a certain threshold, communicate directly with my company, and report transparently to the whole community twice a year. Gerald, wanting to make amends, volunteered to chair the very committee that would ensure this kind of miscommunication never happened again. Over the following months, our working relationship transformed into something far better than what existed before. Instead of dealing with an opaque board making decisions behind closed doors, I now had a direct line to an engaged group of homeowners who understood the real costs of maintaining their shared amenities. We set up a quarterly walkthrough of the docks, the pump station, and the electrical systems, so residents could see firsthand what their dues were funding. I started sending photo updates after every repair, no matter how small, and the transparency built trust in a way that years of quiet compliance never had. The financial side of my business also improved. With a clear, community-endorsed process for approving major repairs, I no longer had to worry about invoices sitting unpaid for months, while a handful of board members debated behind closed doors. Denise and I used the extra stability to reinvest in better equipment, hiring 2 additional technicians so we could respond to routine maintenance requests faster than ever. What had started as a stressful standoff became the foundation for a much healthier, longer-term partnership between my company and the entire Cedar Hollow Lake community. I also grew personally through the experience. I had always prided myself on being accommodating, on bending over backward to make people happy, sometimes at my own expense. This situation taught me that boundaries, communicated clearly and respectfully, aren't the opposite of kindness. They're often what makes real, sustainable kindness possible. I could have kept absorbing costs indefinitely, smiling through gritted teeth, until, eventually, my business collapsed under the weight of unpaid invoices, and my ability to serve anyone at all would have disappeared. Instead, by standing firm on the actual terms of our agreement, I protected not just my company, but the very infrastructure the whole community depended on. By the following summer, Cedar Hollow Lake looked better than it had in years. The new pilings held strong through another round of spring storms. The pump station ran quietly and efficiently, keeping the community's water features flowing and the shoreline plantings green through the hottest weeks of July. The boathouse lifts worked without a single reported issue, and the private dock, once a source of tension, became the site of a community potluck that Priscilla organized to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the new infrastructure committee. I was invited to that potluck, and I almost didn't go, worried it might feel awkward given everything that had happened. But Priscilla insisted, and when I arrived, carrying a dish of roasted vegetables from my own garden, I was met with genuine warmth. Gerald walked over first, shook my hand, and thanked me for not giving up on the community, even when he had given me every reason to. "You could have just cut us off and moved on," he said. "Found other clients, let the board figure out its own mess. Instead, you gave us the information we needed to fix it ourselves." I told him the truth. I never wanted to cut anyone off permanently. I only ever wanted the same thing everyone else at that lake wanted. A fair, sustainable, well-maintained place to call home. Sometimes getting there required an uncomfortable conversation, a firm boundary, and a little bit of temporary friction. But on the other side of that friction was something far stronger than what existed before, a community that understood its own systems, trusted its own leadership, and valued the people who kept the lights on and the water running. As the sun set that evening over Cedar Hollow Lake, casting long golden light across the water and the newly repaired docks, I found myself standing beside Denise, watching kids run along the shoreline while their parents laughed together near the grill. It struck me how close we had come to losing all of this, not through any single dramatic event, but through the slow erosion of trust that happens when responsibilities go unspoken and unaddressed. "You did good," Denise said, nudging my shoulder. You didn't just fix a pump station and some docks. You fixed how this whole place talks to each other. I smiled, watching the lake shimmer in the fading light. It had started with a $63,500 invoice and a board that assumed I would simply absorb the cost, the way I always had. It ended with a community that understood, perhaps for the first time, just how much care and investment went into the place they called home. And a business relationship built on something far more durable than convenience: mutual respect, transparency, and a shared commitment to taking care of what mattered most. Looking back now, I don't think of that spring as the season of the dispute. I think of it as the season everything finally got fixed. Not just the pilings and the pump station, but the quiet assumptions and communication gaps that had been eroding this community for years, long before I ever submitted that bill. And in the end, that repair mattered far more than any dollar amount ever could. In the years since, Cedar Hollow Lake has become a model for how a utility company and an HOA can work together well. Other property managers reached out to Denise and me, asking how we turned a tense standoff into a thriving partnership. We began hosting an annual gathering where we walked visiting board members through our maintenance logs, reserve fund recommendations, and the communication habits that made such a difference at Cedar Hollow. Priscilla eventually stepped up to lead the infrastructure committee full-time, and under her guidance, the group expanded its mission beyond approving repair invoices. They started a small scholarship fund for students interested in engineering and skilled trades, inspired by the contractors who rebuilt the docks that spring. 2 scholarship recipients later interned with my company, learning firsthand how water systems and marina infrastructure worked. One of them, a sharp young woman named Ines, eventually joined our team permanently, and I felt quiet pride watching her troubleshoot a pump motor with the same calm confidence I'd on tar. 2 scholarship recipients later interned with my company up that spring. Gerald never shied away from telling the story of his own misstep. At community meetings, he'd sometimes bring it up himself, half as a joke and half as a genuine lesson for newer board members. "Don't be like me," he'd say with a laugh. "If the numbers don't add up, ask to see the real numbers before you make a decision that affects 300 families." It became a friendly refrain around Cedar Hollow, a reminder that well-meaning people can make mistakes when pride gets ahead of transparency, and that healthy communities admit it and correct course quickly. Denise and I also formalized our own business practices. We rewrote our service agreements to include a clearer breakdown of essential versus non-essential repairs, and built in a mandatory homeowner notification requirement anytime an invoice crossed a certain threshold. It protected future clients from feeling blindsided, and protected our company from ever again being put in a position where a few decision-makers could quietly stall a payment without the wider community knowing there was a problem to solve. Some evenings, when the light was just right, I'd walk along the repaired docks, past the boathouses with their smoothly humming lift motors, and think about how close it all came to falling into disrepair simply because nobody wanted an uncomfortable conversation. It was a reminder I carried into every new client relationship. Strong communities and good businesses aren't built by avoiding hard conversation. They're built by having them honestly, respectfully, and early before small misunderstandings grow into something much harder to fix. My daughter Emma, who was 12 that summer, still talks about the potluck on the dock as one of her favorite memories from that year. She remembers the grill, the water lapping against the newly reinforced pilings, and the way half the neighborhood came together to celebrate something as ordinary and as essential as a well-functioning lake community. She doesn't remember the dispute much. She was too young for invoices and reserve funds, but she remembers her mother helped fix something that mattered, and that people who once seemed frustrated with our family became some of our closest friends on the lake. That, more than the $63,500, is what I remember most clearly from that spring. The families who ended up trusting each other, and trusting me, more deeply, because we chose honesty over avoidance. It taught me that even frustrating disputes can become the foundation for something truly lasting, if everyone involved is willing to slow down, look at the real numbers, and choose the harder, more honest path forward together.